This week we're starting a new Bible study series for a few weeks, and we're going to be looking at the theme of wisdom and where better to start in the book of Proverbs and where better to start in Proverbs chapter 1. So this is a collection of verses from Proverbs 1. It's verses 1 to 4, 7 and 8, 10, 20 to 22, and then 32 and 33. If you want to read the whole thing, you'll have to read it for yourself. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. Out in the open, wisdom calls aloud. She raises her voice in the public square. On top of the wall, she cries out. At the city gate, she makes her speech. How long will you who are simple love your simple ways? How long will mockers delight in mockery and fools hate knowledge? For the waywardness of the simple will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. But whoever listens to me will live in safety and be at ease without fear of harm. Wisdom literature is a place in the Bible where people step back and wrestle with some of the hard questions of life. Questions like, what does it mean that the innocent suffer? Why do the unrighteous prosper? Why doesn't God answer prayers in the way we expect? These are timeless questions that humanity has struggled with from the beginning of time. There were lots of different ideas about wisdom. In some other Middle Eastern cultures of the day, they taught that only the elite could expect to find wisdom. But biblical wisdom is different to that. Biblical wisdom is settled in this idea of fearing the Lord. The books of Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs are considered wisdom literature. Proverbs perhaps is the main one that we think of in the Old Testament. It talks about how living in the fear of the Lord is the key to having a hope of living life to the fullest. Job and Ecclesiastes point out that fearing God is not a guarantee of peace or happiness. You can be the picture of obedience to God and still struggle with various hardship. Perhaps it's for this reason that some commentators say that Proverbs presents the ideal and Ecclesiastic and Job present the struggles many of us face. The book of Proverbs is traditionally attributed to Solomon. He reigned from about 970 to 930 BC. His wisdom was, if you read the book of Kings, a gift from God. And sadly, although he wrote some very wise things in the book of Proverbs, later on he ignored the very words that he'd written and it encouraged others to adhere to. So wisdom is seen as the art of successful living in the light of God's ways. And we have to wrestle with what that means in our own day. So wisdom is seen in Proverbs 1 as recognizing the best course of action in any situation that we face. And not only recognizing that course of action, but then following that action right through. It goes on to say that having wisdom is doing what is right and just and fair. Being just does not apply only to an ethical standard. It includes the idea of applying good reasoning to situations that confront us. Fairness is closely tied to this and relates to our treatment of others. Godly wisdom according to Proverbs 1, will help us choose what is right and acceptable in God's sight. In verse 8, he moves on and he talks about this term son. Some people think it might be a disciple or a student. There's no real knowing about that. But it's interesting that both father and mother are mentioned here as being instrumental in teaching wisdom to their children. It's a team effort, and the consequences of not hearing or forsaking this teaching will be potential disaster. In verse 10, he goes on to talk about peer pressure, and that's been around for all of human history, how the behaviour of our friends can influence our own behaviour. And he says that we should resist peer pressure. By the time he gets to verse 20, he's moving on again, and he's talking about how wisdom is out in the open, how she raises her voice in the public square. So wisdom is appealing to anyone who will listen to her. Wisdom is described with the pronoun she, perhaps in part because the Hebrew word for wisdom is a feminine noun. In Greek, it's Sophia. Gnostic theology really took this to heart, and they taught that the fall didn't occur through Adam and Eve. It happened before the world's creation through a mistake made by a heavenly being called Sophia. And even today, there are all sorts of strange theological ideas being taught and written about to do with Sophia. But just because we give someone a feminine pronoun doesn't mean, I don't think, that that's necessarily someone that's actually alive. We call ships she, and I think wisdom is a bit like that. It is given a feminine pronoun. So wisdom is on the top of the wall, crying out. Wisdom isn't something that's hidden away, it's to be spoken about. The image that we get here is that it's of someone standing in public, proclaiming a message boldly. That's quite an idea that in preaching the gospel, are we preaching wisdom? In 22, wisdom calls for people to rearrange their priorities. Instead of being simple and mockers who scorn wisdom's invitation, they are challenged to embrace wisdom. And right at the end, he says the rejection of wisdom's call is a decision that will have an impact on our lives. So Proverbs 1 begins with this overview, really, of what wisdom is. And there's a few things we might like to discuss. I wonder what happened to Solomon. Why didn't he follow his own advice? What do you think about wisdom being portrayed with a female pronoun? Do you think wisdom could be an actual person? We may want to ask ourselves in that case, where does wisdom come from? How did Solomon describe wisdom? If the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, what does it mean today for us to fear the Lord? And do you agree or disagree with the principle that both the wise and the fool reap what they sow? And perhaps lastly, what steps can we take to ensure that we not only hear, but also apply God's wisdom? I hope we're going to have a bit of a good discussion about it.